do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Hello, and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today we're going to be talking about changing your process over time, whether that be your art, your writing, or other aspects of how you present your webcomic. I'm Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and my webcomic is Sorcery Shenanigans.
And I'm Delphina. I use she, her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Somnolus.
And I'm Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and I make the webcomic On Empyrean High and Overlord of Ravenfell.
So obviously, the broad topic of how you change your process over time leaves it kind of open-ended as to what specifics you could talk about. But what we're going to ask today is, first, what kind of things have you learned over the course of drawing your comic? Maybe you've changed something from when you started, depending on what your expectations are, to what they are now in the middle of your comic. Delphina, do you want to start?
Sure. I started Somnolus about 12 years ago. So I've had a lot of time to grow and change. I actually did start it as in the live journal community for NaNoMango,
Oh,
which was
wow.
National Novel Writing Month. Is NaNoWriMo.
Mm-hmm.
We made a version of that for comics, and the Mongo is like the
Like
manga
manga.
version of it. Yeah, I think Ray was there too back in the day.
That's how Overlord of Ravenfell got started, too.
Yeah, it was good. It was you were trying to do 30 pages in 30 days, which was absolutely not reasonable. Some people were rock stars and got really close to that, but most people just tried to sketch or just do as much as they could at the pace that they could. So that was kind of a good starting point for me to figure out a process, to figure out what's the fastest I could go, what was practical for me. So that's kind of where I started, and I learned a lot over a few failed attempts at trying to do NaNoMango, and really not, maybe it was the medium or maybe it was the writing. A lot of times it was both, but where I would get through part of a scene and then I would just stop, and I couldn't figure out where to go from there. I got the cool thing out of my head.
Yep.
And so part of my learning process was just learning that stamina for me, and figuring out, okay, what are the next steps, what are the longer story arcs like. Yes, I can envision my OCs, yes, I can envision them doing this cool scene, but what needs to change about the way I put this on paper that will keep myself motivated and make sense to readers. So that isn't a question you can answer overnight. It just takes lots of practice and feeling your way around, sometimes in the dark, until you kind of hit a rhythm with it and it becomes normal for you. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned that has served me well year after year as I've continued Somnolus.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. Maybe just because I have the same experience, but it really feels like to me that you have to kind of, quote unquote, throw yourself into the deep end first to kind of figure out where you need to kind of cut back on your process to, like you said, kind of keep in your head how much you can reasonably do without essentially burning yourself out, and still putting out enough content to get your comic out there and get people interested in what you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of trial and error, so much. And it's just going to be such a personal process for every single person. I don't know any two webcomic or artists who work the same way. Some people need
Nope.
to like script things, all the way to the end of the story until they can even start drawing the first page. Other people are just
Mhm.
like, I'm just going to go page by page. And that's what keeps it interesting for me. So, find what's fun for you. Find what gives you energy.
Yeah, it's definitely an over the time thing that I think you kind of have to realize. Like you said, it's not an overnight kind of. You just know how everything perfectly fits into place. All those little puzzle pieces of your process are there. It definitely takes a lot of time. What kind of things have you learned over time, Ray? You kind of started kind of in the nano mango scene too, so kind of have a similar starting experience.
I mean, Overlord of Ravenfell was not my first webcomic, so I kind of already knew what I wanted to do with that one, but I feel like every project still has its own learning curve for how you're going to do it, especially if you're like me and you have to like reinvent the wheel every time you do a comic project, and with different aesthetics and sometimes even different media. Pretty much that's always going to be different, even if you think you know that you have it down pat. So, like for my first comic, it started out, this is going to sound terrible, it started out on copy paper on marker. Uh,
Wow. That's impressive, honestly.
and it ended up being kind of like a painterly sort of comic that was done digitally because, it's a lot easier to do it digitally than if you don't have that much space for, physical copies to be laying around. For Overlord of Ravenfell, I started that digitally, and I still learned a lot because instead of color, I was doing black and white, so I had to focus a lot more on the ink work. The characters just kind of evolved with my art too, which is something that's very common with
Hmm.
webcomics. And then for On Empyrean High, I actually wanted to do something a lot more different than what I'm doing now, which actually got me a few false starts because I just didn't like how it was turning out, because it was originally supposed to be a painterly comic, and then I did a few pages like that. I'm like, this is gonna take forever.
Hmm.
So I pretty much buckled down and experimented until I got what I had now. And even then, you still have that time where the characters are still settling into their character designs.
Hmm.
So you're gonna gradually change how you draw them just because of that aspect as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like over time, not only just like the process itself, but like you definitely end up kind of figuring out in your character designs this small thing I keep accidentally omitting. Oh, it's not as important as I thought it was when I created the character. The kind of personality or the vibe I want to give off to my readers is still there enough that I don't have to worry about remembering this itty bitty detail every time I draw the character.
Oh yeah, you learn how to simplify the character design as you draw them, because you're gonna have to draw them from far away sometimes. So you're gonna be like, what's the essential parts of this character that need to be there to recognize them?
For sure. And I think that's just like really important, just kind of being able to know when to simplify that and what kind of things you can omit to kind of be able to still show that it is that specific character and you're not going to get it like confused or go, that's somebody totally new. Who is that?
Yeah, that's always the worst. If you just, like one panel to the next, I don't recognize who this is. Like, oh, maybe we need to get more
But
consistent
then you
here.
can go very iconic, like how Full Metal Alchemist Ed is sometimes just drawn as like a circle with a stupid hair thing coming out of his head.
Yeah, and his brother is like, I don't know, the shape of a thumb sometimes, but it's gray and it has the like little feather thing coming out of his head. So obviously that's Al. Like, no need to worry. All right. So I guess under like question 2, as your process has changed, have you noticed if uh the time you take to create your comic in any step of the way, are you faster than when you started out, or has something kind of slowed you down?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I'm definitely slower than I used to be. I used to be very fast, and that's
Mm-hmm.
because I am not a perfectionist at heart. I will do the absolute minimum I can do to make the pictures and the words happen on the paper so that you know what's going on and you feel the way you're supposed to feel. And I wasn't always very good at that. And there were aspects of the anatomy, there were aspects of my page layouts, there were aspects of things that made perfect sense in my
Mm-hmm.
head, but when I got them out there, they were confusing to people. And also just writing, I kind of made up stuff as I went along. I was very much a pantser instead of a
Mm-hmm.
planner, and it was not. I would just kind of see a squirrel and chase after it instead of
Yeah.
trying to tie up plot threads. It got me to a point. But especially towards the middle of the story, there is something serious that happens. Like if you're trying to do a long form
Mm-hmm.
story and you get towards the middle, and you've introduced all the characters you need to introduce. You're doing all the things, you've set all the things in motion, and you have to start wrapping up plot threads. You have to start um, bringing things together now that you have all of the pieces on the chessboard. X has to interact with Y. And that takes some figuring out.
Yeah.
That takes some like sitting down and thinking, well, wait, if he could have gotten help from so and so all along, why didn't he do that at the very beginning? I have to come up with a reason with
Mm-hmm.
that, and blah blah blah. And so I can take a very long time. The writing actually takes me much longer than it used to. Art is it's about the same, I want to say, but I've gotten faster, and I find more things to fix, and my style has gradually evolved. So anatomy wise, like there's a lot of things that I figured out about that I was kind of copying from maybe some shoujo manga that didn't really depict things anatomically correctly. So I would do these really skinny Sailor Moon necks and things like that, and it didn't really suit my style after a while. So I would make the necks thicker. You can see that happening in Somnambulist. You could see the skulls getting more round at the back because I think anime could kind of, yeah, in the mid 90s they had some really wonky faces in
Yes,
anime.
definitely.
So so yeah, so just kind of eh, stepping away from my influences and really coming into my own style made me figure out a lot of things that I was just copying from the things that I knew, and I could and should and wanted to improve that. So yeah, it takes a little more time, but you get shortcuts. Clip Studio was a great one because I had started traditionally. I'd started with Photoshop from there, and there you can make comics with them, but they weren't really built for it the way that Clip Studio was. So once
Mm-hmm.
I got Clip Studio, like I was rocking and rolling because flatting was so much easier, and getting your line weight variation in Clip Studio was so much easier. And once I wasn't like spending all my time trying to get the perfect line weight, I could focus on other things. So my art improved, and my coloring improved, my anatomy improved. I think those things. I am a faster artist, but now I can do more detail work and more stuff, and I have more stamina now. So I spend about the same amount of time, but I get more done in that amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to kind of realize, and people probably already know this, but shortcuts aren't bad. They're just there to help you simplify what you're doing so that, like you said, you have more, not necessarily more time, but you have a little more energy and whatnot to spend on kind of refining things maybe more the way that you want, or learning how to draw things even better and essentially just become a better artist.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lot to be said for deciding where your focus is going to be. Like, you could spend a lot of time making a really elaborate background that doesn't really contribute much at all to your story. And part of what the practice gets you is knowing, like, okay, I want this face to be the focal point. I know this is going to be the dramatic reveal. This should be, a gorgeous ballroom or something. So that's where I want to spend
Mhm.
my energy. That's where I want to spend my artistic focus points and like the majority of my time. But everything else can be very simple. I think that happened with my paneling too,
Oh.
because I used to when I first started out drawing comics, just traditionally in a
Mhm.
sketchbook, I would make shape, just draw a line, make a panel any which shape or whatever. And I didn't really leave enough room for gutters. I
Mhm.
think sometimes my layouts got confusing and the reading order became, a little questionable. When again, Clip Studio, I use their paneling tools all the time. And I just draw one big panel on the entire thing, and I use the panel slicing tool to slice that
Mhm.
up. So I get perfect gutters every time that way. And so in some aspects that made my panel layouts a little boring, like I guess on paper, but they were also less
Mhm.
distracting. And I think that's an important thing to realize, that you can make something that's aesthetically gorgeous, but if it's confusing to your reader and it doesn't it the reader can't
Mhm.
tell what's happening, or the reader can't follow the direction of the dialogue because you decided you wanted to make this spiraling shape of a layout or whatever. It might have been a little overboard. You might have needed to simplify things. And actually my layouts, I feel, got a lot. I moved from these crazy weird shapes everywhere layouts to something a little more uniform. And that way, again, it's about the focus.
Mhm.
Then when I have a panel that I really want to break out and I really want to make crackling effects or something cool happening because this magic is happening and this person is disintegrating, or something like that, then that has so much more impact,
Mhm.
because you have that contrast between the boring normal panels and these dynamic panels.
Yeah, it's really important to, like you said, not to realize that not every panel needs like the star treatment. Every panel is effectively the star of the page in some way because they all help tell the story. But there is that one panel, or maybe those two panels on the page that really just help bring an emotion or some part of the scene that's extremely important to the forefront and capture your attention. And Ray, what have you become a little faster in your process? Has anything like kind of slowed you down?
I would say it's kind of give or take, because on one hand, for instance, On Empyrean High has a lot more detail in it than
Mhm.
Overlord of Ravenfell. So just the aesthetics in general, Empyrean takes a lot more time than a Ravenfell page. Um,
Mhm.
but once you get into the habit of drawing, I do tend to get faster, and I tend to get more streamlined. So there's kind of like a base time that just goes up and then just goes back down. So it's kind of a give and a take, because on one hand I
Mhm.
have more detail, on the other hand I'm simplifying other aspects so to just get it out faster. So the main thing that I probably did that saved me a lot of time was how I do shadows, because for my illustrations I tend to do shadows for every bit of color and part and on its own layer, and for Empyrean I just have flat colors and then I have a shadow layer, and that's it. So it's really, you just got to learn like when and where to simplify. I'll also draw like a really nice background, and then I'm going to be like, take that and I'll save it in a folder so I can reuse it later and not have to redraw it. And I've also started incorporating a bit more 3D into my process, just because Clip Studio makes that
Yeah,
so easy to do.
for sure.
Because On Empyrean High has airships, and I had a bunch of reference photos, but they still don't beat going on a 3D stock website and downloading the exact
Mm-hmm.
model of ship that I need so I can see it from any angle I need whenever I want.
Exactly.
I thought you were gonna say nothing beats like actually getting on an airship and drawing the airship.
Oh, I wish.
Oh, if only.
If anyone has an invite, I am more than willing to go on an airship.
Take like 500 photos, bring them back. Yeah, I agree with you, especially about the like simplifying shadows. In my own comic, I definitely had to do that almost right off the bat because I wanted to do the whole like shadows everywhere and like smooth them out so it looks really pretty. But that's very time consuming.
Oh yeah,
It
it's
looks it.
time consuming, but and it also ends up being a lot more inconsistent too than just using one color for like overall. I found
Yeah.
that just using one shadow color, maybe like a little bit of a darker version of it, tends
Mm-hmm.
to help me a lot more with the entire mood of the scene as well.
Mm-hmm. And then I know both of you were kind of talking earlier, I think, even about how you kind of started out doing a little traditional work on your comics at some point. And I have held, it's not really a secret, I just don't go around saying it. But Sorcery Shenanigans did technically start 2014, 2015, I think. It was ages ago. And I was, as Delphina puts it, a pantser. I flew by the seat of my pants. I had an A and a
Mhm.
B. Everything in between
Mhm.
did not exist. And I did it as I was doing
Oh, there's
it.
nothing wrong with that.
Oh, there isn't. It's just that like I had to do it to figure out that it was not for me. And I did them traditionally. I think I might still have the sketchbook. I just might avoid looking at it.
See, I would love to do more traditional comics, but
Mm-hmm.
CSP has my soul right now.
Yep.
Um I have done watercolor comics. My reboot of my first comic was actually entirely in pencil. Um
Wow.
the funny thing is though is overall it does not save me time
Mm-hmm.
doing any of the mediums that I try. Actually does not like save me time at all, because if I'm doing a black and white comic over a color comic, I end up just overloading the black and white comic with detail. So it's like I'm spending the same amount of time because I can put more detail on that because I'm not wasting it on coloring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you find a place for that time. It's so weird because you think like you're faster now, but yeah, one thing that I remember I started out with screen toning.
Whoa.
At first I tried to do like the actual like physical screen tones like
Those are so fun. I love them.
but I was so slow at them. They were so messy. Like you try to cut them out with the little knife and they would get stuck everywhere. And I got about like a page in. I could not find a rhythm for that. And even the ones that I did, where I did like Photoshop masks of them, um, it ended up like being such a bad idea, and part of the reason why my webtoon adaptation is so behind is because I have to redo all those screen tones,
Ah.
because if I resized them at all they would
Mm,
moire. And I thought I was really gonna I was really gonna save time. I
mhm.
was gonna do them all in like vector shapes so I could scale them up or down. That did not turn out to be the
Oof.
case. So that actually, like, it's a lesson
Mhm.
learned, but yeah, there are definitely some mediums, I would say, that if you experiment with them and they seem like a slog, like, try something else. I know so many people get like stuck in the, well, for me at least, I get stuck in the, well, this is the right way to do it, this
Mm,
is the only way to do it, and that's not true.
Yeah, I will definitely say the main thing that webcomics are good for is experimentation.
mhm.
Like, as I said, my first comic started out on paper with markers, and it went through probably several stylistic changes before it ended up like what I ended off with. And as I said, even on the reboot, it ended up being a completely different medium, traditional again on pencil and paper. So just do what you want. It's a good time to experiment is with web comics when you're doing it for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Experimenting, I think, is such an important part of the process. Just so that you figure out a little bit before you even get started what you even want your comic to kind of look like, so that you can begin to even think about the process and what all that entails for you in making your comic. So, we've already kind of touched on this question just a little bit, but maybe there are some more specifics that you guys might want to add. But what kind of time saving changes have you made for your process?
Oh boy. Okay, so one of my favorites right now is I save my sketches from my scrapped pages, cuz I'll do, a scene or
Hmm.
something like that, and I'll sketch it all out cuz I kind of write and sketch at the same time. And then I'll change the writing. Suddenly, one or two panels don't work
Hmm.
anymore and I need a different expression or something like that. Anytime that happens, I have a bunch of different Clip Studio files that are devoted to each character, sometimes settings or whatever. And I'll just copy paste whatever I'm not using into that
Hmm.
folder. And I've built up this kind of database of things that saves me so much time when I'm like, okay, I need a surprised Rana. And I'll open my Rana folder, I'll find something that's there or close to there, and that helps me, the next scene when I need a surprised Rana, I need to throw something in there just to like even see if my script works.
Hmm.
So they're almost like little paper dolls that I'm throwing in there, just to get the mood going. And sometimes, you're having kind of blah drawing days,
Hmm.
maybe you're not on the ball, and everything you draw just doesn't have that punch. So whenever I draw a punchy panel or something like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna save this. I mean, sometimes I'll just retrace stuff that I did use before, but you know what? I want to use it again because that worked out.
Hmm.
And depending on the cropping and depending on the place that you put it in the panel, it might not even be noticeable. So that's a thing you can do. It's a little bit of cheating, but you can do it. It's your own thing. Another time saving thing that I will absolutely agree with both of you, that shading goes faster with fewer layers. I
Hmm.
think if you're coming from an illustration background, you might have some very detail oriented ways of thinking about your artwork that the faster you can drop them by the wayside, the happier you will be, because you're not just spending all day making this thing. Spend whatever time makes you happy, on whatever panels make you happy. But if it, things are going slowly and it's kind of feeling like a slog, look at how you're shading things. Look at how
Hmm.
you're, how much detail you're putting in the line work, and just scale that back. It's exactly what you guys are saying. And uh, drawing character references, vehicle references, costume references, place references. I never used to do that. It always made everything drag because then I would have to figure out, okay, when's the last time they were in this
Mm.
coffee shop? What was in the coffee shop? What color were the tables? What color was the blah, blah, blah? And if you have, a 3D asset of a coffee shop, then you already know where all the tables are. If you have the color
Mhm.
map or even just clips of panels that you made that you could just put all on the same page to say, okay, this is my coffee shop page, or the photos of props that you want to use in your coffee shop. This is how the cups are going to look. This is how the menu's going to look. All that stuff. Just kind of
Mhm.
keep it together so you can pop that open. I use the thing in Clip Studio that's the little sub view thing. You can open up different folders in there, and it'll put them in a little tiny window there, and you can scale it up or something and pick colors from it. That's always really helpful for
Oh
me,
yeah.
keeping track of my references. And also when I started getting Patreon money, I started hiring help. For coloring sometimes, or for shading or flatting things sometimes, it was just nice to be able to say, okay, somebody else is going to take care of these 2 pages, and I don't have to worry about them. I can continue on with something else, and they'll get back to me. They'll get these pages back to me. And it almost became a game for me. Like, how many pages could I sketch before my flatter would get my flats back to me for these other things? And I would end up kind of generating a lot more backlog because I was like entering this little mini competition with myself. And of course I wasn't like telling
Yeah.
my flatter this or judging them based on how long they took, but it was kind of this little incentive that I could trick my brain into working faster because it is. And just working with other people sometimes, that can give you a lot of energy no matter what the context. So yeah, just keep that motivation going, and maybe ask for help sometimes.
Yeah. I think like you were saying, the extra help that you had just like really helped motivate you. Especially with like the little game that you were kind of playing, which I think is just like a really smart thing to kind of, if it works especially for you, to kind of quote unquote gamify your process. Kind of see like, oh, yesterday I sketched like 2 pages in an hour or something. Maybe I can do 3 or 4 pages today and kind of have a whole new like personal best.
Yeah, you can. You got to be careful with that.
Yes.
You don't want to wear yourself out, for sure. And there are some like plot points where I'm just like, oh gosh, okay, I have to figure this out. It's
Hmm.
not going fast, and so there's gonna be lulls sometimes, but yeah, just whatever you can do to make the time pass more pleasantly will
Hmm.
make it feel faster, at least.
And then I'm also just gonna piggyback real quickly on the references thing that you were talking about. Because right now, I would die for references. I am the person that will literally scream at you from the rooftop that references are not cheating. It does not make you less of an artist, and you should freaking use references whenever you need them. Whether that's your own work, or photos from real life, or I don't know, photos you found on Pinterest for like hand positions or something. If you don't 100% know what a thing looks like in a 3D space, there is no problem with finding a reference to get that out of your head.
Yeah, yeah, there's no prize for drawing this coffee mug without looking at a coffee
No.
mug. Nobody's giving away that prize. You don't have to compete for
Yeah,
that.
no, I did years ago used to be that person that was like, a true artist just takes the thing in their head and like puts it on a piece of paper. He doesn't look at an image,
No.
and then I realized, no, that's exhausting, and also I have a bad memory, so how the heck am I supposed to remember anything in what it always looks like in a 3D space. So no, grab a photo, use it. Grab those colors off of something you've already drawn. Make it easier on yourself. You don't need to beat yourself up to make your art, please.
You also have to consider that as a comic artist, you are definitely drawing things all the time that are not your specialty. Like a
Mm-hmm.
fine artist can be like, oh, I like clowns, and that's all they draw. You have to draw everything to make the comic world look believable, so you might as well use what tools that are available.
Exactly. What about you, Ray? What kind of time-saving changes have you made for your process over time?
Well, I've already gone into the fact that I only shade on one layer now to save time, and oh, it saves a lot of time. I also have minimized my sketch layers lately
Oh.
because I used to be one of those people that, like, oh, I'll do this rough sketch that you can barely tell what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll do a nice and more refined sketch on top of that, and oftentimes it was so refined, I'm just like, why am I even doing this? So
Mm.
I kind of now just jump straight to the ink phase because, one, if I'm going to be putting in that extra effort, I might as well just make that extra effort count.
Mm-hmm.
And two, I use CSP's vector layers, which
Hmm.
means it refining, I can just go in and nudge the anchor points to
Mm-hmm.
make it more refined and smooth. So there's really no point in me making a refined sketch when I can alter the lines that
Mm-hmm.
I've already put down. So I can see how that can sometimes be lengthening the process for some people, especially if you're a bit of a perfectionist,
Mm-hmm.
but it really works for me, and I also tend to have a trouble with tangents
Mm.
in my inking, which are like when or two lines go over each other when they're not supposed to, and the vector lines actually really help with erasing those because
Oh.
it's just a click of the mouse. You don't even for the vector eraser. Um I've also been using panels a lot. Sometimes I'll just reuse the line art and I'll color it so it doesn't look completely obvious and copy pasted. And I'll also just do things in batches, also helps speed up the process because I'm sticking to one task at a time, which really helps in gaining momentum for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you with batches. I'm really glad I changed that part of my process because I used to just go, well, I'm gonna get this one page done, and I'm gonna sketch it, ink it, flat it, shade it, you know, step A all the way down to the last final step. And
Hmm.
it's weird to think about doing the same step across multiple pages as saving time instead of just working on one page at a time, but it really does save a whole lot of time. I feel like I get like a lot more done in a, period of me sitting down in front of the computer.
Yeah, I think it also helps you be consistent, and
Mhm.
if you have multiple batches going on at once, I feel like it also really helps the blah days where you're just dragging your feet
Mhm.
because you can focus on one of the steps that does not take as much energy. So for me, flatting is really poo brain. So sometimes I'll just go in and I'll flat a bunch of things. Sometimes I don't even want to do that. So I'll go into my sketches and I'll literally just lay out the panels and that'll be my task for the day. So it's not much, but it does still save me time later down the road.
Yeah, same. I find that if you have, like you said, multiple batches going on at the same time, if you're at different steps in the process, it's nice to be able to still get work done, but feel like you don't have to do the part of the process that kind of mentally takes more energy out of you. And you can kind of do the easier thing, but still get that work done.
I have not been able to get batches working for me. So I absolutely do get stuck. I'll be like, I cannot ink today, but all I have to do are inking things. What do I do? Or even just like I am staring at a blank canvas and there's nothing on it and I'm really stressed out
Mhm.
about that, and I can't work on anything though. So that's just really great advice that I'm going to take because yeah, it sucks. You want to do something and then you're just like, well, I think checking social media is easier than working on this
Yep.
right now, and that's how you get into trouble.
Yeah, definitely. There are those hard days where, like, when I didn't do the batch process before running kind of introduced me to it, where I would be like, well, I'm sitting here and I have to put all the, like, panels together, and I don't even want to do that today. There's a point where you learn that if you force yourself to kind of do that step that you don't really feel like doing it, it's not going to turn out as good as it usually would because you're not, like, 100% into it.
Yeah, and I will say sometimes it's better to break it up into smaller steps if you're really, really having a hard time with one part of the process in general. So, like, say the shading is really kicking my butt. Well, then why not go through your batch and just put the shadow color over each of the figures, and that's all for today. And then the next day you can go and erase where the light is supposed to be hitting,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's not that much work anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind is like, even if you've simplified how you create your pages, maybe there's something that you can simplify even more into even smaller steps on those days that it really feels like such a hard task to create your pages.
And while this might not sound like a time-saving method, you're getting something done as opposed to getting nothing done.
Yeah, or like I was saying, like if you force yourself, you're getting something done, but maybe later on when you look at that page, you're gonna notice that like, oh, this isn't really my best work. If I just hadn't pushed myself through the process, this would have looked a little better. All right. So, to kind of wrap up as like a last question, are there any other kind of process changing things uh that you haven't talked about yet that maybe you want to kind of speak on, or any tips that you maybe wish someone had told you before you started?
Yeah, so I think when you're first starting out, there are a lot of temptations to like get really fancy and add like a lot of bells and whistles that don't matter, like maybe like custom fonts
Mhm.
or website animations, or composing music or video animatics or whatever, and you do it maybe once or twice because it's very cool, but the stamina is not going to be there. So work up to stuff like that, I think is my big advice. And especially with custom fonts too, like there is an actual art to designing fonts and designing typography that is readable. There's all kinds of subtle things about letter spacing and how far your ascenders or descenders go and all that kind of stuff, that if you're just like making your handwriting into a font, like you're not actually going to know how to do that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. I
Mhm.
mean, do things that you're passionate about to an extent, but you don't actually have to reinvent every single thing, and that might be a way of like procrastinating or wasting your time on something that the reader might not even like or experience or like enjoy the same way you do. So that's just kind of a general thing. Also, we were talking about like batch things, and I do, one thing I do in batches is social media updates,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of platforms out there. There's a lot of stuff out there, and pre-scheduling is your
Mhm.
friend, because I don't like going into every single program every single time and I do an update and say my page updated, my page updated, my page updated. So like if I can just do that once at the beginning of the month and get my promos like all out there and scheduled, that is much better for me. I've recently been using a application called Postyburb that it's basically a glorified web browser. You can download it on your desktop and log into a lot of different platforms, not every single platform, but a lot of them, and kind of save templates and things like that for social media posts. That's really been a fun experience for me. I'm enjoying that a lot because I don't have to rewrite go read Somnolus 8 million times. And of course it doesn't take too long, but every little bit kind of adds up, and sometimes you just don't have the energy for it. So that's one of the things that I do in batches, actually. But going back to drawing and stuff, one thing that's going to happen, it's happened with almost every artist I know, is that you're going to draw hair fluffier. Like
Happened to me.
the fluffening is real.
Yes.
It happens to all of us. Like and eventually like you go back to your old art and like, wow, everybody looks like they just got out of the shower and their hair is wet and limp and stuck to their head, and now it's like beautiful and luxurious and big. And I just want everybody to expect and embrace that, because I love it. I love big fluffy hair now.
It's one of my favorite parts about webcomic evolution is the fluffing.
Yes. I think that's all I got.
Ray, do you have any tips or anything else you've noticed changing about your process that maybe you'd want to share?
I think I would say just don't be afraid of changing up your process, because I know you might be going in with a certain idea of what your comic's going to have to look like, but that doesn't mean that you can't change things to make it easier on yourself. And you could just be more open to using certain tools or even media. You're just going to end up drawing different anyway from how you started your comic to how it ends, just because you've learned how to do it fluidly and smoothly and faster as you get more used to drawing the characters and the world. So you might as well take advantage of any tools you can find that will help make that faster and easier on yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I think, just kind of to reiterate what we've all been saying, if there are tools available to you to kind of make your process as easy on you as possible, but still create those pages with the quality that you want to give them, that tells your story in a way that everybody can understand, do it. There's nothing wrong with using those tools. That's why they're there. They're there to help you.
Agreed.
So, we've all given some pretty good tips today. Especially expect the fluffing. It will happen. It will happen to you. It will happen to anyone. You could be next.
The fluffing.
Anyway, that wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Megan, and you can check out my work, Sorcery Shenanigans, at sorceryshenanigans.com.
And I've been Delphina. You can find my comic Somnolus at somnolus.com.
And I'm Ray. You can find my comic Overlord of Ravenfell on Webtoon, and you can find On Empyrean High at empyreancomic.com, or also on Webtoon.
And we will see you later, gang.
I'm going to draw some fluffy hair.
Make it as fluffy as possible. It will be fluffier later, but make it very fluffy now.
Just the entire panel fluff hair.
If I can see panel behind the hair, that's not enough.
Thank you for listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. Want to know some other ways to support us? Check out our Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/ScreenTonesCast, where your support will help us create more episodes, reach cool extra bonus goals, and keep us talking about anything and everything webcomics. You can also find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and our Discord server. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, rating, and supporting, and we'll see you next time.